Come to order, and this joint hearing of the Readiness Subcommittee and the Sea Power Projection Forces Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee is now in order. I will start with my opening statement. I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before us today to speak on the posture and readiness of the mobility enterprise. We have before us General Stephen Lyons, the commander of the United States Transportation Command. General, welcome. We have Miss Lucinda Leslie, the acting administrator of the United States Maritime Administration, and Mr. Kevin Turkowski, close, the Associate MURAD Administrator for Sealift Requirements. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As you know, mobility is an incredibly important subject. If you can't get to or sustain the fight, you have no chance of winning it. Yet, in spite of this fact, each year's budget request doesn't fully fund mobility to meet our combatant command requirements. I suspect that this will be the case with this year's soon, or maybe late to be released budget request as well. In last year's budget request, the Air Force requested to retire 10 KC-10 aircraft, 13 KC-135, in spite of the fact that the KC-46A was incapable of performing operational boom refueling sorties. General Lyons, you opposed this last year. I suspect you'll tell us why it's no longer a problem. Your specific statement was that the retirement of those aircraft would create a capacity gap with significant impacts to the combat command daily competition and wartime missions. Congress heard you loud and clear, and we enacted legislation that prohibited the retirement of the KC-135 aircraft until 2025, curtailed the rate at which the Air Force would retire the KC-10. General Lyons, I look forward to hearing from you and why you think we ought to change that law sometime before 2025. Regarding Sealift, we must study our history to better invent our future. General Washington's success was due in part to the French fleet preventing the resupply of the British forces. Conversely, America's ability to surge forces and material across the Atlantic and Pacific created the conditions for success in the Second World War. So, let's now turn to our current Sealift system. Oh my. The average age of the ready reserve fleet is 44 years old. I looked at that. Average? You mean some of these are more than 44 years of age? Oh my. The surge fleet averages 30 years old. The pre-positioning fleet averages 28 years old. General Lyons, Ms. Lindsley, is this a winning hand? The Navy's near-term solution is to recapitalize our old ships with used but newer old ships, commercial vessels, and to delay the new ship procurement until after 2026, which is the current law on which they are supposed to be delivered. Is this a winning solution? I remain concerned that we are not doing enough now to recapitalize our Sealift fleet to meet capacity requirements. We need a national Sealift fleet of smaller, affordable, more numerous ships, and we have to start this effort now. Failure to do so will place the Marines, the Army, the Navy, and anybody else that wants to fight anywhere in the world in an unacceptable risk in force projection capability beginning in 2024. Actually, today. I ask our witnesses today to explain in detail how they intend to get after this problem, and to elaborate on whether the services are providing the necessary resources to solve this problem before it becomes a crisis. Lastly, General Lyons, please provide an update on the Defense Personal Property Program. We are aware that the GAO sustained protests to the Global Household Goods Contract that you have taken corrective actions based upon their recommendations. I also understand that you are in source selection and therefore limited in what you can say. However, I am quite interested in hearing whatever you do have to say on how you're overseeing this contract. We want to avoid another version of, oh God, our favorite issue, the privatized housing debacle. So I'd ask you to speak on your plan for ensuring that the warfighter is taken care of, and most importantly, their spouse and children. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing today, and I now turn to Mr. Lambourne, the ranking member of the Readiness Subcommittee, for his remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Garamendi. And I also want to thank our witnesses who are here today from Merid and Transcom. Together, our mobility enterprise is responsible for the sealift, airlift, and ground logistics and distribution for our armed services. I wish we could have had this important discussion after receiving the budget, and we eagerly await its delivery. I am sure we will have some more questions after its arrival. Our mobility enterprise must be ready to support the combatant commands in the face of evolving global threats. Yet I am concerned we are underprepared to support tomorrow's fight. Deterring our near-peer competitors subjects our military to the tyranny of distance, which underscores the importance of logistics and strategic lift. I hope today that our witnesses can preview the upcoming update to the Mobility Capabilities Requirement Study, which we expect to be delivered next month. And given the current state of our sealift capability, it would appear that we are in trouble. Almost all of our forward combat unit equipment moves by sea, but our ships are old and some near obsolete. The Army has stated that planned fleet reductions could result in, quote, unacceptable risk in force projection capability beginning in 2024, unquote. I know that Transcom can influence but not direct service budget decisions, but I look forward to hearing concrete solutions and long-term plans, not simply relying on service life extensions to rebuild the fleet. Aging airlift and air refueling assets present another challenge, specifically as we work through recapitalizing the air refueling tanker fleet. General Lyons, when we spoke last week, you mentioned continued issues with the KC-46. I look forward to hearing about plans to operate the KC-46, perhaps in a limited fashion, and ongoing retirement plans for our KC-10 and KC-135 aircraft. Our threats are evolving, and the mobility enterprise must keep pace. It is critical that we are meeting the obligation to sustain, repair, and recapitalize our mobility support assets. Our ability to project and sustain our force is at stake. So I want to thank the witnesses for their time here today, and I look forward to having an open and candid discussion, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lambourne. I'm going to be pinch hitting here for Mr. Garamendi for a few minutes while he votes. Good morning, and thank you to the chairman and the ranking member, actually afternoon, Mr. Lambourne, and also to my colleague from the Sea Power Subcommittee, Rob Whitman, for conducting this joint hearing to examine posture and readiness of the mobility enterprise. I also want to thank the witnesses, General Lyons, Ms. Leslie, and Mr. Tokarski for being with us today. Again, you all bring a lifetime of expertise to this issue, and I know a commitment to addressing the problems which were mentioned in the opening statement. As our witnesses know, under the National Defense Strategy, with its focus on the Indo-Pacific and European Command, the ability to move quickly goods, equipment, and people at a moment's notice is an urgent priority of our defense operations and plans. As both subcommittees know all too well, the ships and aircraft that comprise our sealift and air mobility capabilities are increasingly challenged by advanced age, readiness shortfalls, and obsolescence. The disturbing 2019 turbo activation stress test conducted by Merid, Transcom, and the Navy made blindingly obvious the need to recapitalize the fleet. In 2020, the United States Maritime Administration and Transportation Command faced added obstacles with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Yet despite that backdrop, in last year's NDAA, Congress, working with Merid and Transcom, passed multiple maritime provisions to significantly modernize and boost the fleet. A major bipartisan accomplishment was the establishment of the Tanker Sealift Security Program, modeled after the highly successful Maritime Security Program. This new program authorizes an adequate stipend to private ship owners who make their tankers available during time of war or national emergencies. We also secured an additional $388 million for the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel, which is, again, a new build program that is showing great promise in terms of an efficient, cost-effective way to produce American-made ships. This was in addition to new priority grants for small coastal ports and terminals to help with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, $30 million for the Title 11 Loan Guarantee Program, a new strategic program focused on merchant marine recruitment, training and retention, and the extension of the Jones Act and other federal laws to offshore renewable energy. It's important to note that our subcommittee also included a provision in the Maritime System Emergency Relief Act in last year's NDAA. With this inclusion, we were able to provide relief to those in the maritime industry during a national emergency, increased training opportunities for merchant mariners, authorized a new grant program for smaller ports and terminals, and established the National Shipper Advisory Committee to give our importers and exporters a formal way to interact with the Federal Maritime Commission. We also initiated a three-pronged approach of extending the current Sealift ships. Number one, buying used vessels. Number two, requiring a start of a domestic new build ship with added authorities to build these new ships using existing designs and alternative contracting approaches that can save time and money. However, we know work remains. The COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing. We recently saw a cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline, resulting in fuel shortages, price spikes, and 4 total Jones Act waiver requests as of today. 2 waiver requests to transport jet fuel, gasoline, and ultra-low sulfur diesel between coastwise points, and 2 additional waiver requests to transport motor fuel between coastwise points. I personally, and I think a lot of my colleagues, continue to believe that waivers such as these should be thoroughly vetted, rare, short, and only granted in exceptional emergency circumstances, such as the one that we found ourselves in a couple weeks ago. Finally, we have continued our rigorous oversight of our aerial refueling capabilities and the rollout of the KC-46 tanker. We remain concerned by the 6 Category 1 deficiencies on the KC-46 as of this week and expect follow-up from the agencies before us as well as the Air Force to ensure that the platform we're delivering to our airmen is safe, effective, and reliable. They deserve nothing less. As we prepare to begin the work on the 2022 Defense Authorization Bill in the coming weeks, I look forward to learning more from our witnesses on their important work in addressing these challenges. And with that, I will now yield to the ranking member on the Sea Power Subcommittee. We actually could have called ourselves the Sealift Subcommittee last year. My good friend, Mr. Whitman from Virginia.
Well, thank you, Chairman Courtney. Joe, I appreciate your leadership and your friendship. And I want to thank Chairman Garamendi and especially again, our Chairman Joe Courtney and Ranking Member Doug Lamborn for participating in this detailed review of our nation's mobility posture. I also want to thank our 2 witnesses for participating today, actually 3 witnesses for participating today. And most importantly, General Lyon, I want to thank you for your years of service in the military. I would note that this will likely be your last hearing before this committee. General Lyon, you have worn the Transportation Command mantle well. Always forthright and honest to this committee, and an outspoken mobility advocate who is willing to call out the improvements and the deficiencies of the military services. This committee and our nation is better because of your service. And we honor you and we'll miss you. Thank you. As I was preparing for this hearing, I am reminded of the grim statistics of our surge Sealift forces, and I'm sure this comes as no surprise to any of you. However, we are once again having no capitalization in fiscal year 2020. The average age of our surge Sealift, as has been so eloquently stated here, has increased by another year to almost 46 years old. And the plight of our forces is so bad that after having the U.S. Coast Guard pulling the certificate of inspection of a number of ready reserve force vessels, MARAD made a decision to reduce 10% of the fleet from 46 to 41 vessels. This reduction further limits our ability to project forces in times of conflict. In my estimation, this is quite simply a dereliction of duty and the definition of a classic seam issue with DOD. We must do better. And as to the tankers, the KC-46A continues to lag in providing relevant capability to General Lyons. General Van Ovos, the next TRANSCOM commander, has called the KC-46 aircraft a lemon. I understand that the earliest fix for this aircraft will be September of 2023, but this contract and Boeing losing over $5 billion to date on this contract is embarrassing. In my estimation, the overall procurement of this commercial aircraft and the penalty built into the contract requiring minimum orders of deficient airplanes is at best procurement malpractice, or at worst, an illegal binding of Congress requiring annual procurements without any specific multi-year procurement authorization. On top of this, we are forced to hear semi-triumphant Air Force messaging that these aircraft fixes are on Boeing's dime, not the Pentagon. However, This does not account for the whole story, because it's not Boeing who's paying to keep these old aircrafts flying. The cost is on the shoulders of the taxpayer. And I look forward to better addressing this issue in the FY22 NDAA. Additionally, Chairman Smith has discussed his concern about a concept called vendor lock, which allows contractors to recoup procurement losses in sustainment because of sole source sustainment contracts. I'm afraid we're already starting down this line with the KC-46A tanker sustainment effort to the detriment of our nation's taxpayers. Finally, we debated the overall tanker force structure last year and supported General Lyons' minimum tanker fleet. I'm pleased to note in General Lyons' testimony that he supports the United States Air Force tanker retirement schedule, and I look forward to amending the FY21 NDAA to more efficiently manage our legacy tanker force structure. As we consider how to best address our mobility woes in the FY22 budget request, I'm reminded of the words that have been attributed to Winston Churchill, where he said, "Let our advanced worrying become advanced thinking and planning." It is time that we stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. We need to take a serious look at these rather simple issues and turning our worrying into advanced thinking and an actual plan. Again, I appreciate Chairman Courtney and Chairman Garamendi's support for having this important hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
We have managed to learn the trick of the game: be the last person to vote on the first vote and the first person to vote on the last vote. So some of my colleagues will be leaving shortly. Okay, if only they would allow remote voting while we're actually in Washington. That's not the game. I believe we now turn to our witnesses. General Lyons, please, thank you for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Chairman Garamendi, Chairman Courtney, Ranking Member Lamborn, Ranking Member Whitman, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to represent the men and women of United States Transportation Command that are operating around the globe this very day, 24/7. Powered by the dedicated soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and civilians, TRANSCOM underwrites the lethality of the joint force. Our enduring purpose is to project and sustain military forces globally at our time and place of choosing, providing our national leadership with strategic comparative advantage and a wide range of options to enable the advancements of U.S. national security interests, enable us to assure our allies and partners, and if necessary, respond with a decisive force to win. Given the unprecedented challenges amid the COVID-19 global pandemic, I could not be more proud of the men and women of TRANSCOM who have continued their impressive support to the Joint Force and support the whole-of-government efforts to help American citizens right here at home. I appreciate this committee's continued support on important global mobility issues. Many of them have been mentioned, including Sealift recapitalization, area refueling modernization, and defense personal property reform efforts, as well as your acknowledgement of the future challenges of logistics operations in an all-domain contested environment. Today, I'm pleased to join Acting Maritime Administrator Leslie. I thank you very much for your continued leadership and support for our military forces, and I look forward, gentlemen, to your questions.
Thank you, General Lyons. We now turn to Acting Administrator of the United States Maritime Administration, Ms. Lucinda Leslie. Ms. Leslie, I understand that you have one prepared statement for both yourself and Mr. Tokarski.
Good afternoon, Chairman Garamendi, Chairman Courtney, Ranking Member Lamborn, Ranking Member Whitman, and members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Maritime Administration's role in supporting the nation's strategic Sealift capabilities. I'm pleased to join General Lyons and to be joined by Associate Administrator Kevin Tokarski. Having worked on the Hill for approximately 16 years, I am humbled and honored to be here today. As a former staffer, I could not help thinking with a sense of amazement that my words would be appearing in the proceedings of a committee of the House of Representatives, and I wanted my first words in that permanent record to be words of gratitude. I thank Congressman Elijah Cummings, for whom I worked for nearly 15 years. Without the opportunities he gave me, I would not be here today. More importantly, the guidance, counsel, and support he gave me, and the wisdom and grace of his example made me a better person, and I am blessed that, as he would have said, our lives eclipsed. I also want to thank the colleagues with whom I now work. The dedication to excellence and service to our nation exhibited by the men and women of MARAD inspires me every day, and I'm honored to work with these extraordinary public servants. I also thank Secretary Buttigieg for his leadership and support and for his commitment to the maritime industry. America's strategic Sealift helps the nation project power globally. During peacetime and wartime, the government-owned Sealift fleet, which includes the MARAD-maintained Ready Reserve Force and the Military Sealift Command's Surge Sealift fleet, are supported by a fleet of commercially operated U.S. flag vessels, including those in the Maritime Security Program. These fleets are supported by a strong and highly qualified U.S. Merchant Marine and by shoreside personnel. The members of the U.S. Merchant Marine have gone above and beyond to ensure the continued operation of our maritime transportation system during the COVID-19 pandemic. MARAD appreciates Congress's support for the U.S. maritime industry, especially the leadership of the members of this committee. However, more work remains to sustain a strong and effective Sealift capability, as you have all noted. The 41 Ready Reserve Force vessels and the MSC vessels provide Sealift surge capability during the initial stages of a response to a major contingency. However, Ready Reserve vessels average more than 46 years in age, well past their expected use, which makes recapitalization critical to maintain readiness. As authorized in the fiscal year 2018 NDAA, MARAD solicited for a vessel acquisition manager, or a VAM, in early 2020, and an award is imminent. This is critical to advancing our recapitalization effort. The U.S. flag commercial fleet provides much of the sustainment Sealift following surge operations. The MSP is the heart of sustainment Sealift. The program encompasses a fleet of 60 commercially viable, militarily useful vessels that are active in international trade and available on call to meet DoD contingency requirements. In addition, the newly authorized tanker security program has the potential to address the need for more U.S. flag product tankers in support of both national economic needs and DoD contingency requirements. Thank you for your work to make the authorization of the TSP possible in the 21 NDAA. Cargo preference requirements keep vessels operating under the U.S. flag and create U.S. mariner jobs. MARAD is committed to ensuring compliance with cargo preference requirements, and we continue outreach to federal agencies and industry to assist them in understanding and meeting these requirements. MARAD is also committed to supporting the domestic U.S. flag trading fleet. The requirements under our coastwise laws support U.S. shipyards and sustain American shipbuilding supply chains. Aside from the tens of thousands of tugboats, towboats, and barges that ply our domestic waterways, about 100 U.S. flag ocean-going vessels operate in the Jones Act fleet. Access to a pool of qualified mariners from a robust commercial maritime fleet is essential to maintain Sealift readiness. Due to the small number of ships in the U.S. flag ocean-going fleet, MARAD is concerned about our ability to quickly assemble an adequate number of qualified mariners should an extended mobilization occur. MARAD, of course, continues to proudly support mariner education and training through the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and the 6 state maritime academies. Congress has recognized the need to replace the aging training ships used at these institutions and has appropriated funding for 4 national security multi-mission vessels. Construction is underway on the first 2 ships, and the first NSMV is expected to be delivered in fiscal year 2023. We are committed to providing our DoD and Transcom partners with the Sealift capabilities needed to meet our national security objectives. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee on the state of our nation's Sealift as a component of the mobility enterprise. I ask that my written statement be entered in the record and look forward to working with you to advance U.S. maritime transportation interests, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your testimony. As you can see, we're going to be moving around on our side. Please excuse us. We'll blame that on, I don't know, Steny Hoyer. Why do you do that to us? In any case, a series of questions. In my opening statement, General Lyons, I raised a question. Let's get this issue of the current law out of the way, and tell us why we should keep the law or not. This has to do with the the KC-10s and the KC-135s.
Well, Chairman, let me just start by thanking this committee for your support, particularly last year on this issue.
Yeah.
So last year you asked a question quite legitimately. Can you hear me okay? Okay. What was the impact of the Boeing KC-46 delay combined with the legacy retirements on operations? And at that time, the implications for day-to-day operations were significant. Since that time, the United States Air Force has done some incredible work. First, to make sure that Boeing is signed up to complete the work that they're under contract to complete. Second, to work through some interim capability releases to allow us to use the KC-46 in operations, albeit not across all receivers, but certainly across a large portion. Also to delay some of the retirements on the KC-10 fleet, and then to increase the contributions for the Guard and Reserve. And that combined has put us in a good position. I really appreciate the support of the Air Force. I've talked to the chief about this. I think we're in a very good place, and I do think it's the right decision to allow the Air Force to retire the KC-135s that they requested retire.
Very good. Mr. Courtney and Mr. Whitman have both left the hearing. This is their turf, and we'll pick it up. They may want to pick it up when you come back. I think most of the members of this committee have had the opportunity to be on the KC-46 and observe the changes and the operation. I want to now move to the Sealift capacity. And I'd like to stay with you, General Lyons, if I could. What do you propose we do about what is, in our view, and perhaps yours, a very serious shortcoming in TRANSCOM's ability to meet the requirements of moving personnel and equipment across the oceans? General Lyons.
Well, Chairman, again, I want to thank this committee, and particularly you, for your personal support on this particular issue. We share the sense of urgency that the department must address the aging Sealift fleet, and I'm proud to report over the last year, the department, the Secretary himself, Secretary Esper, the Navy, TRANSCOM, supported by the Maritime Administration, has spent a lot of time on this issue over the last year. I think there's a good way forward, a strategy, if you alluded to it, used by strategy of military useful vessels off the market at 1/10 the price of what it would cost to build a new Sealift ship. This committee, has authorized the procurement of at least the first 9 vessels, at least the first 4, without connecting it to a new build Sealift ship. And I think you heard the acting administrator talk about this year. This year, we should be able to deliver the first or second purchase, the first 2 purchases of a used Sealift ship to begin the recapitalization of the fleet. And I think you're aware, as we look across 10 years, 33 ships out of 50 ships will meet end of useful life. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. The department has put money in the program. I know the President's budget hasn't made it here yet, but I think you'll be pleased with the resources that have been applied to this, and I think you'll be pleased with the priority that the CNO has placed on this particular issue.
Thank you. I'd like now to turn to Marad and Ms. Leslie and to go down the same path. Is it going to work? Are we actually going to be able to find the resources to purchase the ships and put them into the Ready Reserve program and also into the Navy's ongoing program? So, Ms. Leslie, let's talk about that. What strategies Marad has in mind to fully meet the requirements? Some of this you touched in your opening statement, but let's go into detail here.
Thank you for that question, sir.
If you would use that microphone and be real personal with it, it would be helpful.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As mentioned, we anticipate the award of the vessel acquisition management contract shortly. And there is, obviously, the Navy is the program of record for the funding, but funding available for this year to bring at least into contract 2 vessels. And then, of course, we do have ongoing maintenance on the vessels that we will be retaining in the Ready Reserve fleet.
Can we get there with the current strategy? Can we actually achieve the goal of having ships that are reasonable in shape and preparedness, given the current number of ships that we're buying 2 a year? If the average age of the Ready Reserve fleet is 44 and we're buying 2 a year, my guess is we're following further behind every year.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tokarski in a minute, but to say that it's to bring 2 under contract this year, and I believe the authorization currently available is to bring 7 ships in. Again, recognizing that the Navy is the program of record for the funding, but the vast majority of the Ready Reserve now is comprised of ships that were bought and then modified to meet our needs. And I'll turn it to Mr. Tokarski for additional information.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I think that the strategy that we do have, that we collectively with the Transportation Command, the Department of the Navy, and Department of Transportation through the Maritime Administration will work. We've shown and proven that over the history of this program to be able to go and acquire Sealift vessels with the right level of resources. The Navy is committed this year with the resources to enable us to purchase the first 2. I think there's a recognition within the Navy that the additional resources above this minimal amount is going to be required. We do know that the plans are to accelerate their plans for acquisition in the following years. So we do envision next fiscal year for the procurement of 7 ships, five additional ships to a total of 7. But it's not a clean, straightforward, because there are some restrictions in terms of how many we can acquire at a given moment. So not only just the resources alone. The other spear of this attack is also to be able to put the resources into the ships that we do have in the fleet today that are going to remain in the fleet. And the Navy has resourced us at the President's requested level in the last administration to make sure that we're putting the right resources on the ships that we're going to keep. We're not putting good money into bad ships. We're putting money into the ships that we're going to keep in the program that we're going to need to be able to sustain. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, we received from MIRAD a chart. Ships aging out, ships coming in, ships being purchased, ships being built. It appears as though the original discussion we had several years ago, in which we would try to purchase newer used ships, hopefully American-built, repurpose them, and then also build American-built new ships. General Lyons, is that new ship, new American-built ships still on the agenda?
Chairman, I'll defer to the Navy on this. I can say where I believe we are as a department is that we proceed to the maximum extent possible with the acquisition of used ship with high military utility, do conversion in the U.S. yards, and fix the fleet. I think, as this committee looks at budgets across time, it's going to be a pretty steep bill at 10 times the cost to build a new Sealift ship. But I wouldn't say it's off the table, sir, but I would say that there is large consensus that the right way to move forward to invest the money wisely would be acquired used vessels.
I asked Ms. Leslie to tell us ships out, ships in, new ships, refurbished ships. General Lyons, I would suppose that you would be working with MIRAD in putting together that table of acquisitions and the like. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, sir. We're very much part of that process.
Here's my concern. We've heard from the Navy about what their shortcomings are, specifically with regard to shipyards, the private shipyards. The strategy that we tried to put in place 5 years ago now was to give work to the private shipyards. And that work would be the rebuilding of the American surge fleet. That seems to be almost dead, even though that policy is still in the law. We're going to have to look at this holistically. The shipyards, American private shipyards, are principally building naval kinetic vessels of all kinds. And we have almost no capacity, very limited capacity to build ships that are for surge capacity, surge use. And this is a significant security issue for the United States. And so I'm not prepared to give up on the notion of building these ships, but I'm thinking about a different plan. Before I go there, the tanker security program, I thought Mr. Whitman would be here. When he comes back, I do want to go in. If he does not, we'll come back with the second round of questions on the tanker security program to really understand how that gets built out. It appears to me there are going to be a lot of naval vessels in the far-off stretches of the ocean that will not have fuel, given the current tanker fleet that the Navy has. And that's not a good thing. So I'm going to hold on that, give it some thought, and when we come back to it. Where I want to go to Mr. Torkowski. Did I get it right that time? Close enough. We had talked about a strategy of a national security fleet that would be using Jones Act ships that are built to be militarily useful, of all kinds, roll-on, roll-off tankers, I don't know, LNG if the Navy ever goes there, also ships that are single-purpose, ships that are particularly useful for providing fuel in remote locations onto land. Also ships that are heavy lift ships. It turns out that the American Jones Act fleet has some of these ships available and could have more if we actually obey the law that this committee passed on the outer continental shelf, the wind industry, which is going to be very big. And they're going to need heavy lift vessels to build those turbines, if those are American built, and are also available for the Navy when and if needed. Could you please comment on this kind of a strategy and the laws that are currently on the books, how we might utilize existing programs and laws that may be on the shelf, but nonetheless available to us?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. The history of our nation, and particularly in ensuring that we have Sealift capability, has intrinsically been linked to having a defined strategy that invests in commercial Sealift vessels, whether it's through construction programs that have expired, construction differential subsidy, operating differential subsidies. We recognized that our approach was to invest in these commercial vessels. There were financial assistance programs given to those. And then those ships that were entered into commercial service, typically for about 25 years. And at the end of that period of time, there's a requirement that the vessels be turned over, in essence, either purchased, or we did an exchange program where we'd exchange out old tonnage for an equal scrap steel, and they were turned into the fleet, to our National Defense Reserve Fleet. That's how we built our Sealift capabilities in the early days of the Ready Reserve Force. We had a strategy that linked our investment in commercial enterprises that planned for those vessels at the end of that time period to turn into and actually became the newer ships into our fleet. So today, when we look at the programs that we have of record that can support the Title XI Mortgage Guarantee Program, is available for domestic shipbuilding opportunities. vessels in that. We're excited about offshore energy development and the new construction of vessels to be able to support those type of operations. Those ships likely will have military capability and be militarily useful. But I still think that the strategy about a longer term defined where we have a broader investment, if you will, for domestic building with an end state that we're gonna see that return back into our Sealift fleet really then presents a linked strategy than today where we go and we see what's available for purchase on the open market. Thank you.
I want to pursue this strategy. Presently, we're bouncing from one thing to another here, and it appears to me we're not going to be successful anytime soon in rebuilding our Sealift surge, our Sealift capacity. It's just not in the cards where we're going. I would like MARAD to develop the strategy that you just talked about, Mr. Tokoski, and present that to this committee, as well as to the Coast Guard Maritime Committee, so that we can proceed with what is already on the books. It's already the law, but not really utilized in any way. We do have the tanker security program out there, and that's a piece of the puzzle. We do have the purchase of used but not so old ships and repurposing them. But these are all short term. If we go back to what you talked about and lay in place a strategy for the future, recognizing that in the first 25 years, the ships could be available because they have received a subsidy from the federal government, and they could be called upon, just as airplanes are currently called upon that are held by the airline industry when needed. Maybe specialty ships, maybe roll-on, roll-offs, or other kinds of ships, and that the Navy and the Ready Reserve be very special ships, munition ships, for example, that are not going to be, hopefully not in the commercial marketplace. If they are, we got a different set of problems. So, General Lyons, what do you think? And then I'm going to turn to Mr. Wilson. Heads up, Mr. Wilson, you'll be next, followed by Brown and Scott.
Well, Chairman, you and I are in complete agreement on the essence of having a strong U.S. flag mariner fleet, both organic and commercial, and then the mariners that sail both of them are a critical component of our national defense and our national security. I think the work this committee's done on the tanker security program is great work. We fully support that. We fully support the Jones Act, the Maritime Security Program. I think the question that you are alluding to, sir, is whether you could sweep the Jones Act into the national defense fleet in time of emergency, like a Civil Reserve aviation fleet. And in wargaming, what we've discovered is we would probably not want to uncover the economic viability of the coastal-wise trade for the purposes of American support. But there are examples, there are exceptions to that, I believe, where there could be some utility in some of those ships and certainly in the mariners. So what I would say, sir, is we're in complete agreement with the need for a strong U.S. merchant fleet sailed by highly qualified mariners. It's critical to national defense.
Before I turn over to, thank you, General. Before I turn over to Mr. Wilson, we've been working on this in multiple ways. In last year's bill, the committee required that the U.S. military use the commercial fleet with minimal or very little exception. In other words, to give cargo to the commercial fleet so that its economic viability could be more secure. And we're going to continue that effort and provide very few, or hopefully very few, exceptions to that. I think my colleagues know I can go on for hours about this, and that's not a good thing at this moment. Mr. Wilson, it's your turn. Mr. Wilson, your mute button, please. Did you get the mute button? As always, Mr. Wilson, you're making a brilliant statement that we cannot hear. So somebody get his mute. Perhaps, Mr. Wilson, the problem lies with our staff. Hold on just a second. Staff tells me the problem lies with you, Mr. Wilson. Hang on a second. Mr. Scott, are you live? Mr. Wilson, stand by for a second. I think this is Pogo. We've discovered the problem, and it is us. Take a deep breath, get your coffee.
See if we can do a sound check with Mr. Brown.
Pardon?
Can we do a sound check with Mr. Brown?
Mr. Brown, are you live? No, you're not. Mr. Brown, hit your mute button, please. Mr. Lamborn, you may have saved this hearing. Being the ranking member, it is your turn while staff busies themselves to figure out what the problem is with remote. So my colleagues who are remote, stand by. Mr. Lamborn, your turn for questions.
All right, thank you. General Lyons, I want to repeat what others have said. Thank you for your great service and distinguished and long service to our country. We talked about the KC-46 on the phone the other day. I think I mentioned to you I went up in one when I was down in Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma a little while back, and it looks like it's a great plane to fly, and the pilots and crew love it. There is this problem with the remote video feed, though, of the docking system. So where does that stand, and how soon will we have a fix on that?
Well, sir, first let me just say thanks for your interest in taking the time to go up. I know the crews absolutely loved it and appreciated your attention and interest in this critical weapon system. I think, the delays of the KC-46 have been discussed in many different venues. I appreciate the fact that the Air Force and Boeing have come to an agreement where Boeing is committed now to deliver what they were always committed to do, which was an aircraft equally capable as the KC-135 is today. And so that includes the remote visual system repairs, modifications to an RVS 2.0. I'll defer to the Air Force and the program manager on timelines and programmatics. I will say in the meantime, though, sir, relative to where we were last year, the Air Force has done a lot of great work in presenting an interim capability. I think you saw that weapon system's ability to support a number of receivers, not all receivers, not in all conditions, but certainly a capable platform to do work in the day-to-day competitive space. So the Air Force has proffered that capability under certain limitations. They've also made some delays in the KC-10 profile of retirements, enhanced some Guard and Reserve contributions. And I think we're in a good place now. But to your point, sir, there's a lot of work to be done between now and the actual delivery of an updated KC-46, what is anticipated to be late FY23.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I'll shift gears and ask you about household goods delivery. When we had a hearing 2 years ago and talked about it, I was very concerned about access to the program for small businesses. And so now that we are further down the road, what steps have you taken to ensure that the move manager won't privilege companies with which it has pre-existing relationships, which would shut out other small companies of the DoD relocation business?
Yes, sir. No, thanks for the question, and thanks again. 2 years ago, There were a lot of complaints about this program, and frankly, I agreed with every one of them. We knew we had to do some significant change to instill some accountability, and we're still on that road. We've made some great progress this past year in improving customer satisfaction rates and doing some smart things, but we still have some structural work to do with the global household goods contract that you're referring to. As I always say with our commercial partners, if they have a viable, good, quality moving company today, I guarantee their services will be required in the future. The issue with the market is, is particularly during peak season when we try to move 400,000 service members around the globe, is capacity. And we're trying to settle our relationship with industry so we incentivize the growth in capacity, gain accountability, and being able to optimize a larger network. But sir, to answer your question directly, there is a place for small business in this program.
Okay, that's great to hear. Once again, thank you for your service, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. For all of my colleagues here and remote, the movement in and out to vote makes the gavel order at best complex and probably maddening to all of you. Mr. Wilson, you were up. Unfortunately, you missed your slot. It was taken by Mr. Lambourne. We now, as is the process, we go back and forth, and that would then be, yeah. Mr. Norcross, you were up. The chairman of the Sea Power Projection Task Force arrived 30 seconds ahead of you, right. Mr. Norcross. Joe, you're up.
Great, thank you. I'd just like to go back to one of the items I mentioned in the opening statement was the enactment of the tanker security program in last year's NDAA. Again, General, as you know, this was a 2-year process, and we were finally successful in the conference committee for NDAA to, when the Senate acceded to the House position and, again, authorized and stood up the program in law. Again, just for the record, and I know as was alluded, this may be, possibly one of your last hearings. I'm not so sure we're going to let you go at Sea Power in the next few months or so, but can you just elaborate a little bit about why getting this program in place is critical and why we obviously need to push to get some funding through the appropriations process?
Yes, sir. Happy to. And again, let me just thank the committee because the committee did a lot of work in this area and led the effort in the tanker security program. It is critical in my view when I look at the liquid energy value chain and what that represents, the way it operates today and the way we will need to morph it to operate under all domain persistent attack. It's clear that we need to have a U.S. flag capability to meet our national defense and national security needs. Today, that's not the case. We have a large dependency, not just on commercial tankering, but foreign flag commercial tankering. And I think this program will be an important step to move us to a U.S. flag dependency, which I think is critical to national defense. Sir.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I know, we realize, we still got follow-up work to do here now that we have the framework in place, and we're just going to make sure that it becomes, fully operational. Ms. Leslie, again, in your opening statement, you alluded to the new multi-mission vessel program, which again is a new construction program, which again was a multi-year process in terms of getting that recognized. But as you point out, the primary goal is to create a training vessels for maritime mariners of the future, which is a really important workforce challenge for the country. But also, there's a way that MARAD was authorized to proceed in the contracting process, which again I think it's important to elaborate a little bit on that today because frankly it may solve other problems that we have in terms of new construction for Sealift, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the question. Yes, the Maritime Administration is extremely excited about this program. Obviously, it's early days, but we We do have appropriations for 4 vessels with 2 under construction, and we're anticipating delivery of the first ship in April of 2023. We had a recent IG report on the program with 2 recommendations. The first recommendation is closed. We're working to close the second one, but note that the IG cited several important aspects of the program that have contributed to what we hope will be a very successful program. That is having mature designs in place and using the marine design firm that helped to develop those designs to conduct subsequent oversight, and then using firm fixed price orders after getting a vessel construction manager in place. So the vessel construction manager is using the best private sector construction techniques. MARAD's job is to oversee the VCM, but we hold the vessel construction manager responsible for the delivery. Again, the IG cited these important steps as being critical to getting the program up and running and hopefully to delivering ships on budget to design specifications on time.
So the intent obviously was to try and, again, create a program that can get true cadence in terms of, serial production. And, I know, Mr. Tokarski, you were sort of, present at the creation with some of this, but, that's sort of the vision that we have here, which is that, you've sort of tried to debug a lot of the program at the beginning, and then really, as I said, sort of get that cadence in serial production. Is that a good way to describe it, or is there?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for that question, and thank you very much for your support for the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel program. And in fact, I think it was this committee's direction to our agency that helped us to be able to map out a pathway forward. Not an easy pathway, but one in the sense of making sure that we had the rigor of how we did the contracting part for this. You challenged us to use an entity other than ourselves to contract for the construction of the vessel. And I think that wisdom was that we didn't want to see this project take a long time, and we wanted you to do it within the time bounds of a fixed budget or a fixed price structure. And you saw the wisdom that commercial companies build ships today, and when they build them, they've got to build them on time, and it's got to be on budget. And so this mechanism that we use, the vessel acquisition manager, first time we believe this has ever been tried to do this approach, to be able to build a multiple number of ships. And we didn't have appropriations for all 5, still don't, but in recognizing it as a means to be able to give flexibility to the Congress, if we showed success in that, to be able to appropriate the program as it moved forward, but allowing the vessel construction manager then to use their commercial means, with something that they do very well, to be able to go out and solicit shipyards, and in essence to build a commercial vessel to our requirements and our standards. And we are on track right now, as Acting Administrator Leslie reported, to be able to deliver that ship on time and on budget, and most importantly maybe, is if they're going to build what we asked them to build. So we're not changing the requirements along the ways. And so that's the discipline, I think, that the Congress gave us in terms of how we structured this. Thank you.
Right, and again, to be specific, the work now is in Philadelphia, right, adjacent to the Navy Yard?
Yes, sir. Our vessel construction manager, Towed Services, awarded the contract to Philly Ship. And so it's what used to be formerly called the Acker Shipyard, but Philly Ship is building it. Right now we have 4 ships under contract. The first two have started full construction.
Well, it's great to see, again, one of our heritage shipyards kind of coming back to life, with this initiative. And again, looking forward, when we sort of struggle with the Sealift recapitalization, and again, we now have a new plan submitted by the Navy that's talking about significantly increasing the number of used ships and delaying new procurement Sealift until 2026. We're going to hear from them, and obviously, it seems like another sort of, I wouldn't call it a U-turn, but certainly a change in direction, from where over the last few years what we've sort of had put before us. But assuming this vessel construction manager kind of model, really shows some success. I mean, there's, in my opinion anyway, and maybe you could just sort of comment, either both of you and maybe General Lyons, that's a model that we could transfer and transplant into Sealift recapitalization in terms of, again, trying to get some volume in terms of construction. Again, I don't know if any of the witnesses want to sort of comment on that.
Chairman, I'll take it. I mean, I completely agree with your assessment, and I appreciate MARAD and Navy really moving in that direction. That's exactly the approach they're taking with a vessel acquisition manager, soon to be under contract, and soon to acquire the first 2 ships to begin the recapitalization effort of the Sealift ship. So we fully support.
Great. Well, again, you look like you want to make a comment, Mr.
Sir, thank you for that follow-on question. What I've observed over the years in the Sealift business, if you will, and I've been doing this for a long time, is for the business that we have to do in terms of having vessels to be able to support the Department of Defense, this is a capability that the commercial industry can do very well. Our Maritime Security program, all the ships that we have in that program, they're all militarily useful. They know how to go out and acquire the ships. The vessel acquisition manager was using the same thing. Let's leverage what commercial industry does on a regular basis in terms of going out and identifying new ships to bring into U.S. flag. They operate them commercially. They do the economic model for the right ships to be able to do that. They can do this. And if you're asking if I think the vessel construction manager could be extended to building what in essence are commercial roll-on, roll-off or Sealift capable vessels, I see no reason why that would not be possible.
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, my goal is to have a subcommittee Codell to Philadelphia when the time is right, where we can actually see some, tangible, movement on that program, because I think it's really, frankly, a very significant development for the future of, the issues that we're talking about here today. So with that, I will now recognize Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Chairman Courtney. I want to, again, thank our witnesses for being with us. General Lyons and Ms. Leslie, I understand, as I stated earlier, that there is a 10% reduction in the Ready Reserve Force, essentially going from 46 ships down to 41. And I'm just curious as to what are the problems with delivering the necessary force structure? Why have we had to reduce those number of ships? I understand it's about Coast Guard certification, but it seems like to me that that would even heighten the importance of bringing new ships or newer ships into the force. And what's the practical impact of this reduced force structure? I mean, if the call goes out tonight, this is pretty precarious. And then if you look at any other vessels that aren't certified to go to sea, and listen, I have to agree with the chairman in his question about what is the long-term strategy. There doesn't seem to be one. If there's not a long-term strategy about how we recapitalize, then it deeply concerns me, especially since we've been emphasizing this now. I know between Chairman Courtney and myself, Chairman Garamendi and Mr. Lambour, now this is going on 4 years, and we still haven't gotten to the point of getting 2 additional ships in. Now, I can tell you, by any other measure in any other place, that would be unacceptable. And I would say it's unacceptable here. So I just want to hear your perspective on where that leaves you, General Lyons, as far as force availability, and Ms. Leslie about what's the path forward.
Well, sir, it's a great question, and it's a fair question. We have spent a lot of time on this issue this past year with the Secretary himself, with the SecNav, CNO, MARAD. Matter of fact, Secretary Esper at the time took such interest, he dedicated a Cape issue team to look at Sealift and to look at what we were going to do as a department to move forward, to align our strategy and then align the resources behind the strategy. So there were several things that came out of that effort, one of which you just alluded to, which was the retirement of a number of ships that are currently in the Ready Reserve fleet, some of them in the surge fleet. So a couple of those were retired because it was no longer a utility. 2 of them were Cape Mays or Cape M's that were required for special missions. A couple were crane ships that were no longer required based on op plan analysis. But the ones you're alluding to really are 7 roll-on, roll-off ships. And we made a conscious decision to allow those to be retired a couple years early, so that we were not continuing to put good money into bad after a bad effort. In other words, to spare a dry dock down the road. with the full intent of moving forward as fast as possible, given the authorization that you provided to us a few years ago to start the acquisition of used ships. And as the Administrator mentioned, I believe at the end of this year we'll have the first 2 ships that you authorized a few years ago. You'll see, you know, as the budget comes over and what follows that in the program is a real resource line to go ahead and begin continuously year after year, a couple ships, 5 ships, a couple ships to begin that recapitalization effort. And I share your frustration because I wanted to move faster, but we're headed in that direction, sir.
Very good. Ms. Leslie?
Thank you, sir. I reiterate what the General said. You know, our plan is to have the vessel acquisition manager in place as quickly as possible, and then to bring 2 ships under contract at least this year. I believe we're authorized to bring 7 ships and hope to accelerate the acquisition once the vessel acquisition manager is in place. You know, so that is our component of the Sealift the Nation Needs plan. Let's see if Associate Administrator has anything to add or any.
Now, Congressman, we address, is there a long-term strategy? The Navy has submitted a plan to the Congress for a long-term strategy. And I believe you've expressed your views to me more than once about that. But following the Chairman's question earlier, I do think that we are on the pathway that will lead to bringing in newer tonnage into the fleet. It's going to be older than a newly constructed vessel, but we are going to be able to find the right ships for it. This is how we built this Sealift fleet that served this nation very, very well from that standpoint. I mentioned earlier, too, with the Chairman, that there are some parts to that which maybe are not linked for a long term, and that's an area that I think the Chair's already asked us to look at coming back and reporting to the committee on maybe some other approaches to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that, Mr. Tokarski, with you and Ms. Leslie about the lack of at least execution of a plan. I would argue that the plan that we have is, you know, non-specific at best, and it's aspirational. You talk about these 7 ships to be procured, obviously used ships. The question then becomes, though, we really need to have a long-term plan. You know, we have a 30-year shipbuilding plan to build combat ships, yet we have nothing that even remotely resembles that in how we recapitalize the ready reserve fleet. It seems like we're just kind of, you know, making this up as we go along, which is not the way to do this. So the question becomes, if we're going to go through the first 7 ships in this recapitalization as buying used ships, are there other alternatives? And where do you see the path going forward to sustain the effort that needs to keep us in maintaining the proper number of modern, capable ships in our ready reserve fleet? Because you can't just forget about this and then push the button and expect it all to come back. And I tell you, this is from experience. The best man at my wedding was Dave Jansen. Dave Jansen was an engineer down there, and I remember talking to him all the time about what he was doing as an engineer to plan for the repair and upkeep of those ships. It is significant. So, you know, I've had decades of experience in listening to Dave and his concerns with that. So anyway, I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Thank you, sir, for that question again. The second part of that question, in terms of the investment that we're making, we have developed a plan with the Navy and that to make sure that we're making selective investments in the Sealift ships that we're going to retain in the program. And I think when I look at the readiness numbers of the fleet today from where they were a year ago, we're about 10 percentage points higher in terms of overall readiness today. I'm not where I need to be. I need this fleet at a minimum of 85%.
Yeah.
It fluctuates on a daily basis. Today we're at 71%. So I'm short of capability, and I know what the challenge is. But we are working very strongly with the Navy's support to make sure we're making the right investments for that. The first part of the question, are there other alternatives for ways to be able to rebuild the Sealift fleet? I think maybe there are, and I think as with the Chairman's guidance discussion before, there may be some ways to look at things that we did in the past. and may be able to make an investment so that we can, and I appreciate wanting to build ships in American shipyards. I'm happy to sit here before you and tell you I've got 4 under contract, when many said we'd never do that. But it was this committee and other committees' support on the Congress that allowed us to do that. So I do think that there are ways that we can make that kind of investment to make sure that we've got a long, steady plan that will recapitalize naturally ships into the program. The Maritime Security Program fleet, the average age of that fleet today is probably 13 years, 13 or 14. And it's interesting because that fleet, we pay a substantially less amount and able to maintain it, but yet it maintains a younger fleet. Why is that? Because it's built in that it has self-recapitalization targets in there. So those ships are going to come out of the Maritime Security Program when they age out at 25 years. What happens to them? I want them to come into my National Defense Reserve fleet. Mm-hmm. I'm buying them today, in essence, as part of the Maritime Security Program. We're investing in them. And I'd like to invest with them for the next 25 years. Mm-hmm. Because I think we've got good Sealift ships that we'd be able to retain in the program. But I don't have the mechanisms in place to do that today. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do a technical issue here. All of you that are on virtual, remote, I want you to hit your mute buttons and unmute, and then I'm going to call the names that I see on the screen, and hopefully I'll hear your voice. If not, we'll keep smiling and keep listening, and we'll try to work our way through this technical problem. Are you ready? Okay, hit your mute buttons, folks. Okay. Mr. Wilson, can we hear you? You're looking good, but we can't hear you. How about Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, would you like to say hello to us? Yeah, well, you're out of luck too. Who else do we have there? Calais? No, just give us that. Yeah, we understand the Hawaii hand signals, but could you also speak? Apparently not. Who else do we have on the screen? Who? Carl? All right. All of you disrespected us by not bothering to come in here and see us personally. For the moment, you are out of luck, unless you want to send a written question. I know, Mr. Scott, you were up next, but no, you're not going to come on board until we get you on board. The technical team's trying to get you guys on board. I would suggest that you keep your mute button off. In other words, ooh, somebody's talking to me. Who was that?
Can you hear me? Hey, Mr. Chairman?
All right. Now that you're on, don't hit the mute button, but Mr. Norcross is up next. So we're working our way through this. Mr. Norcross?
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. General Lyons, to echo the other comments, congratulations on what you've done.
I'm looking at it on the other screen.
Okay.
No.
Apparently, those of you that are remote are coming online, so now you can hit your mute button on your side. Our team will not hit the mute button. Hit your mute button, those of you that are remote. Mr. Norcross, you have the floor.
Thank you. I had the opportunity to go with Chief Brown on the KC-46 along with Mr. Whitman a few weeks ago and see them run through their trials, refueling each other. An incredible plane, but certainly a long time getting here. We were told there's a fix that both sides have agreed upon. Is that been memorialized and signed?
Congressman, my understanding is that's correct. The Air Force and Boeing have a written agreement to proceed on the requirements for the Remote Visual System 2.0.
So that's the good news. Bad news is certainly much longer than we ever anticipated. But on the good side of this, we have a system that literally is 10 years newer, using technology that was not even available. So with that, at least there's a silver lining, and certainly there are features and enhancement on the Pegasus that's not available to us that we can't talk about in open session. I just want to shift the gear here for a moment. As I understand it, about 95 million gallons of fuel in air-to-air operations each year. I'm not sure how much that fluctuates, but that's a lot. We've seen over the course of the last 2 months, 2 major interruptions in the fuel supply, particularly for the Northeast. Texas shut down their refining capacity when they lost power. That meant that the coastal beginning of that pipeline where the fuel goes in interrupted that. Coastal has been operating above its maximum capacity for years. It is that critical point of failure. But what also is one of those issues, and we look at, I have Joint Base McGuire just north of me, but we have many bases up and down the coast that really depend on that fuel. You have storage that will take care of some of that bump, but you heard Chairman Courtney talk about the Jones Acts. They're looking for waivers because we don't even have the capacity to move that fuel. But when we look at some of those reasons, if we had gone back just a few years, 10 refineries have shut down in the last 2 years. So we're looking at refining capacity on the Northeast shutting down, which even puts more pressure on that coastal pipeline, which we can't expend. Are you looking at this from a national security point that that refining capacity is close to where the users are? They don't need that pipeline, or there are other methods. Have you and Transcom take a look at that? If we have a long-term problem that we really need this, what we're going to do?
Sure, I'd offer a couple things. When the Colonial Pipeline issue occurred here in the last week, I had multiple discussions in coordination with the Defense Logistics Agency director who procures liquid energy fuel for the department, and I can assure you that she assured me, as well as the secretary, there were no implications for DOD relative to the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. Having said that, I think what we all saw, was that cyber vulnerabilities in the commercial sector can very well lead to national security vulnerabilities if we're not mindful.
So
and
I understand that. So we had a 1-week shutdown, not good at all. But if there was a major disruption over weeks, again, you have the tanks, obviously, to take care of that bump. But in the event that that was out for a longer term, do we have a long-term strategy with the loss of 10 refineries to make that up?
Sure, on that particular question, I defer to Homeland Security and Department of Energy on that particular domestically related question, which I think you're alluding to.
No, because that's the last thing we would ever want. Just to shift over real quickly to the multi-mission vessels, the workforce is so important to develop. Courtney knows that with it comes to subs. Philadelphia Shipyard has had that legacy and are building back up. So just to give a shout out on the great things they're doing over there and the authorities that were allowed. I am out of time and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norcross. First of all, to all of my colleagues, apparently we have solved the communication problem. I don't want to bet my career on it, but apparently it's solved. Here is the order we presently have, the Galva order. Wilson, Luria, Scott, Kalehi, Bergman, Carl. So I'm going to apologize on behalf of the technicians and turn to Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I'm going to
go for it.
Yes. Hey, I can see Anthony Brown. Is that good?
You're good to go.
Well, hey, thank you, Chairman John Garamendi, for holding this hearing, and I appreciate your coordinating in the midst of scheduling challenges what's going on, and I appreciate your technical proficiency to get us on the back on schedule. With that, I want to thank our witnesses for being here and how important what they do is for our country. And I would, at this time with General Lyons, I'm encouraged that America has joined with a Dutch-led European Union mobility project that enhances the EU-NATO cooperation, improves the ability to mobilize across Europe. In your assessment, what remains as the most serious infrastructural challenge to the mobility of armored combat brigade teams and personnel throughout Europe, especially and particularly in our valued allies of Central and Eastern Europe, who were suppressed by communism for about 50 years? What can this committee do to help?
Sir, thanks. Thanks for the question. I really admire the work that NATO and the EU, SACEUR, is doing, particularly in Europe, with regard to mobility quarters. I think you're aware we can push the force faster than they can absorb it based on some of the infrastructure limitations the farther east that you go. And so there's a major effort led by EUCOM and the allied contingents to invest in infrastructure, bridges, rail, heavy transport, and that has taken, I think, a great deal of momentum and achieved some resources. And it'll take some time, but I think that's moving in the right direction, sir.
And I'm encouraged. I've actually seen the improvements in Bulgaria and Romania, and it's obviously it has commercial implications that are positive of our very valued allies of Central and Eastern Europe. Additionally, General, this month I introduced the National Guard Cybersecurity Support Act along with Congressman Andy Kim of New Jersey. It ensures that the Guard has the statutory support to lean forward in regard to cybersecurity defense of critical infrastructure. To what extent is Transcom evaluating its cyber vulnerabilities, especially among the commercial partners in the military Sealift command? What impact would this have on your ability to conduct operations?
Sure, I can't comment specifically on the legislation because I haven't seen it. I can say, though, that to answer your question on what we've been doing in the area of cybersecurity, it has been and remains a major priority for the command, both on the Doden, working very closely with General Nakasone at Cybercom and NSA, and off Doden, working with our commercial partners. We've got an incredible amount of information sharing going on. We've got several initiatives vis-a-vis cyber hygiene, contractual compliance, self-reporting, as well as some special projects that link up select providers with certain defense intelligence agencies to help see themselves more clearly and buy down the risk. So we're making progress. I would report to you that when I talk to at least C-suite level executives, they really do get it, and we are pushing on an open door. So in that regard, I think it's good news, but a lot of work to do.
Well, we appreciate your efforts. And Ms. Leslie, I want to commend you for your service as a congressional staff member, and there's life after Congress. Best wishes to you. What are the actions of Transcom and MARAD taking to ensure that there are sufficient qualified mariners to sustain a prolonged activation should it become necessary?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. Yes, obviously ensuring an adequate number of mariners for a sustained prolonged mobilization is of critical importance to MARAD. We are working through the tasks that were given to us in the 2021 NDAA, including developing a strategic plan for workforce development. And of course, this is due every 5 years until the administrator determines that there is an adequate number of mariners for sustained strategic Sealift. We're also reviewing the federal resources available to assist individuals who want to come into the industry and or upgrade a credential as they move forward in their career. And of course, we continue our support for the 6 state maritime academies in addition to operating the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. So we're pushing forward on all fronts, but certainly do share the concern to ensure that we have an adequate number of mariners.
And thank you for providing extraordinary job opportunities for young people. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Because of the coming and going of the members, we're going to try to keep the original gavel order as much as possible. If your name is called and you're not here, we'll get back to you with the next opportunity, given Democrat, Republican back and forth. Ms. Luria, you're next.
Well, thank you, General, Ms. Leslie, for appearing today. Ms. Leslie, I wanted to address this to you. This hearing is the posture and readiness of the mobility enterprise. And the maritime component of the mobility enterprise is not limited to just the Ready Reserve Force, the Strategic Sealift Fleet, and the MSP Visa vessels, but encompasses the entirety of the civilian U.S. maritime industry, including available U.S. mariners, commercial shipyards, and U.S. flag vessels. And I just wanted to quote Alfred Thayer Mahan, who we all know well. He said, "The commercial value cannot be separated from military and sea strategy. For the greatest interest of the sea is commerce." So on that note, I was just looking at the number of ships operating today. There's some 44,000 ships in the world operating, ships involved in international trade. And of that 44,000, how many of those are U.S. flagged?
Less than 100.
Thank you. It's just over 80 U.S. flag vessels in the foreign trade.
Thank you, and understand there are others who are just involved in the Jones Act as
Yes.
well, Jones Act trade.
We do have Jones Act vessels that
Yes.
are deep sea going. Yes, correct.
So in a typical year, how many ocean-going cargo ships are built in the U.S.?
All of the Jones Act fleet would be built in the U.S.
Of those conducting international trade?
I'm not aware,
Not
of
aware of
any
any?
that have been
Right.
recently
So
built.
I did a little research. I see that there's 2 that have been built in U.S. shipyards since the 1990s. And for the Jones Act vessels, approximately an average of 5 per year with a peak of 10 in 2016. To contrast that, how many ships are built per year in Asia? It's order of magnitude.
Yeah. I'm sorry, and I'll have to take that back for the record, but significantly more than are built here.
Okay. Well, as the Maritime Administration, I would think that we'd have a perspective on the scope. So my research shows us that somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 vessels are built in shipyards in Asia. And does China subsidize its commercial shipbuilding industry?
Yes, ma'am, to my understanding.
So, approximately 7 years ago, Congress mandated the Department of Transportation submit a national maritime strategy to Congress to specifically make recommendations to increase the use of U.S. flag vessels to carry imported and exported cargo from the U.S. Yet today, it's 7 years later, and I'm not aware of any policy recommendations that have been made, and the U.S. maritime enterprise has continued to decline. Just to confirm, there's currently no requirement or any percentage of U.S. commercial imports or exports other than government-generated cargo that is required to be carried on U.S.-built and U.S. manned vessels. Is that correct?
Yes, the cargo preference requirement applies to the government-impelled cargoes. You are correct.
And so if Congress implemented a law that required a percentage of commercial maritime import and exports to be carried on U.S.-built and flagged vessels, what effect would that have on U.S. shipbuilding, the number of U.S. flagged vessels, the number of U.S. mariners?
Yes, ma'am. I understand where you're going with the question, and obviously for our commercial fleet, cargo is king. So providing cargoes will have the effect of increasing the vessels under the U.S. flag. And to your point, obviously 46 U.S.C. 5101 states as the purpose of having a merchant marine both the national defense and the development of the domestic and foreign commerce of the United States. And as you know, as we've discussed, it also states that a substantial part of the waterborne export and import foreign commerce of the United States should be carried on U.S. flag vessels. At the present time, it's, by Mered's estimation, less than 2%.
So we have no policy, nothing that compels commercial shippers to ship anything on U.S. flag vessels. There's no requirements, and to my awareness, as mentioned, no recommendations that have been made by the Department of Transportation since the Cobble Act was passed in 2014, which called for recommendations from the Department of Transportation.
In the last administration, the Maritime Transportation Strategy was released. Goal number 1 is to strengthen U.S. maritime capabilities, essential to national security and economic prosperity. Obviously, I've just come in, but I'm reviewing the strategy, and we're looking at prioritization of the goals and objectives in the strategy, and also to ensure that they comport with the administration's priorities.
So basically, I would just say that it feels like we just
Ms.
keep
Luria?
saying that we're waiting on a plan and we're waiting to refine the plan. So I understand my time has expired, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. I want to refer you to the Energizing the American Shipbuilding Act, which has been introduced repeatedly for the last 6 or 7 years. It deals in part with your issue. Here is the order, the gavel order, as it exists now. Scott, Kalehi, Bergman, Carl, Gallagher. If you're not here when we call your name, we'll get you back in the queue immediately thereafter. Mr. Scott, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the other members, I've been going back and forth between this committee hearing and the floor. So if some of my questions have been asked, I apologize. But Ms. Luria was talking somewhat about the Jones Act, I believe, and the importance of it. And certainly I understand that there may come emergency circumstances where we might need a waiver. There was discussion of a waiver. I'm from Georgia, and so the Colonial Pipeline. But I think we need to be very careful about waivers to the Jones Act. Not saying it could never be done, but just saying that's something we need to defer on the side of caution on that. The other thing I think we need to be very much aware of as we push through this next National Defense Authorization Act is the increased cost of steel and raw materials and what it will do to the cost of building ships. And interested in any comments that the panel may have on that. And the Coast Guard seems to do a better job of contracting than we do through the naval services. Any comments on that I would be interested in. And then one final comment coming from Georgia. We've got the John Lewis class of tankers and replenishment ships that are coming out. When do we expect the first of those 20 ships to actually be christened? And how long will it take from start to finish to get the first ship in the water on the John Lewis class of ships? Those are my questions.
It appears as though our witnesses are looking at each other. The last question you had was the John Lewis ships. What is the status of that line of ships, and where are they?
Yeah, Chairman, I'd have to refer to the Navy on that one. Yeah, Transcom doesn't have that, equity, but
okay.
So I'm sure I can't answer that
All right,
question.
let me ask this.
I would say, sir, just on your comment about the Jones Act, I completely agree with you. I think any waiver in that space should be a rare exception, and I acknowledge and agree with the importance of that. You asked about materials. I can't talk from the industrial base or the service perspective. I can see in a limited view of what we see, and we do see increases in material costs that we acknowledge will drive certain costs in the contract. And I cannot sure talk to the Coast Guard, although I'm a huge fan of the United States Coast Guard. I just don't know how they conduct their contracting, and I'll defer to the acting administrator for any additional comments.
Thank you, sir. And I'll just pick up on the Jones Act and emphasize how the administration has made clear its support for the Jones Act as part of the Made in America executive order, which explicitly names the Jones Act. And in the case of the waivers, I can only comment on, MARAD's role in the process is to determine whether there are vessels available should a waiver request be presented.
Okay. The Merchant Marine Academy is under the Department of Transportation. Is that correct? So that's not under either one of you?
No, that The Merchant Marine Academy is under the Maritime Administration within the DOT.
Maritime.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. And as far as the accreditation of the Merchant Marine Academy, I mean, just one suggestion with the Merchant Marine Academy. I think we should move it closer to the way our other academies operate, where with regard to the way the students are treated with regard to payment and health care. I know there would be an increased cost to that, but I think that would be a big plus to the Merchant Marine Academy, which plays a valuable role, obviously, in Transcom and making sure that we have the professionals out there to get the equipment that we need across the seas. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield with a thank you to the people that are there on the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I see that Mr. Brown has returned, so he now moves ahead of Mr. Kalehi. And so here is the present order. It'll be Mr. Brown, Mr. Kalehi, Mr. Bergman, Mr. Carl, and Mr. Gallagher until somebody goes to vote, in which the dance will continue. Mr. Brown, you're up.
Steer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
You're on. Please continue.
Am I audible?
You're on, Mr. Brown.
Okay, I assume I'm audible. Okay, thanks. You, General, my question is for you. The Chief of the Navy Reserve, Vice Admiral Mustin, recently testified that his top equipment priority is procurement of the C-130J to replace the legacy KC-130T. I understand that the current KC-130T does not have the capacity to meet wartime intra-theater logistics requirements, and unmet lift requests reflect the gap between demand and capacity. The question is, what is the recapitalization plan for the KC-130T to ensure U.S. forces have the capability to meet the rising demand for airlift?
Representative Brown, thanks for the question. You know, that's a Navy-specific program. We do not have that weapon system in our inventory, so I'd have to defer to the Navy on that particular question, sir.
Okay. The other question, which may have been asked, I've been back and forth like so many members. I think Mr. Lamborn was boasting about his time on the KC-46. I don't know if he had to replace the boom operator and do some aerial refueling himself. I don't know. But I too had an opportunity to take a demonstration flight. And I was able to speak with some of the boom operators and see the RBS issue for myself.
I am. Hello. Hi. Yeah.
Jackie, I can hear you too.
Around, so I haven't heard
we can all hear you, Jackie.
as I would like.
The question is, how confident are you that Boeing will be able to deliver the RBS fix by 2023, and what impact, if any, does the delay of the KC-46 have on the mobility enterprise?
Congressman, I'll defer to the Air Force program manager on the programmatics of potential delivery timelines and delay. We are tracking against an FY23 delivery of the RVS 2.0. Of course, that begins a fielding of the next iteration of the KC-46, so that's just the beginning of the process. There's a lot of retrofit that will have to take place. What I'm really pleased about this year is the work the Air Force has done to deliver interim capability, as well as some decisions about the KC-10, as well as increasing Guard and Reserve contributions to meet day-to-day and crisis response kind of timeline. So as we sit today, we're in great alignment with the Air Force. I would confess to you, my view from looking at this, I think we've got a long way to go on the KC-46 with regard to Boeing and the work that has to be done between now and 23. And, we'll continue to monitor that closely, but the Air Force will be in a better place to answer that question, sir.
Thank you. My last question, Mr. Chairman, again for General. What role does the Coast Guard play in the mobility enterprise? Are they do they contribute assets to the Sealift capability that we have?
Sure, they don't contribute in that sense where they're contributing mobility assets, but they play an incredibly important role in standards and safety and just a wide range of activities regarding security, surveillance across the globe that facilitate our mission. So we have a very close working relationship with the Coast Guard. We actually have Coast Guardsmen that work inside of our headquarters, very, very close collaboration. But we don't rely on the Coast Guard specifically for a lift, if that helps.
Thank you, General. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So again, as the members are sort of coming in and going off to vote, the most latest revised list is Mr. Gallagher is up next.
Thank you. Earlier this year, former Indo-Pacific Commander Admiral Davidson warned that the Chinese Communist Party could take action against Taiwan within the next 6 years. I'm increasingly concerned that our modernization plans, while well-intentioned, do not reflect the sense of urgency we need in order to be prepared, not for conflict in 2045, but in 2025. So with that in mind, looking across the maritime lift enterprise, how does our current capacity stack up against what we would need to fight and win if we had to go to war in Indo-Pacific tomorrow? I mean, what are the no-kidding, most pressing gaps, and how can we quantify them?
Well, sir, thanks for the question. We spent a lot of time working analysis on that particular problem, all the problem sets, but you mentioned specifically a China problem set. Without getting into a classified venue, certainly there's a number of challenges there. The great news is we move across the globe every single day. Every single day we're moving forces around the globe. It's an incredible deterrent. It's an incredible assurance factor for our allies and partners. And I think we demonstrate quite clearly just in the last year or so our ability to move with an immediate force and follow with a decisive force. So I have great confidence in the mobility enterprise to do anything that the President or Secretary asks us to do. Having said that, we know as we move into the future, the environment is changing rapidly in front of us. We know that we have to be able to operate under all domain persistent attack. And so in our mobility studies that we're working on now, we've introduced that kind of aspect of contested environment. And how would that play out, and how would that degrade our ability as a nation to deliver the force? So it's a great question, sir. We spent a lot of time on that particular issue, and we're going to continue to evolve as a command to ensure that we can maintain our ability to project and sustain the force globally.
I mean, in a classified setting, I mean, would we be able to kind of pull the string on that and get a sense of, depending on what scenario you're playing out and what assumptions you're making, what the points of failure are?
Certainly, we can share that with you.
That would be great. I mean, I've been an advocate of DOD. I know it's maybe above your pay grade, but DOD inviting Congress into its war game so we could all just get on the same page. But that you don't need to respond to that, lest you rankle some people in the five-sided building. I guess I would ask: is America's present network of bases and alliances in the Indo-Pacific optimized for our maritime lift needs in support of both the contact and blunt layers? In other words, what authorities or additional facilities would you need to optimize that network for conflict?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm sure that Admiral Davidson talked about this, as well as the current task force that's working, on a China focus. I think there's an effort and initiative to look at, global posture that's well needed and will be well received to reorient our posture in the Pacific. What's key in my view is that we have a global posture and a regional posture, right? That gives us, physical, psychological, and temporal advantage over a potential adversary. So from our perspective, that means we can come and we will come at any time that the President asks us to do so. And so I think the reorientation is very helpful. I think it'll help us in the competitive phase, and it would certainly facilitate a transition to conflict, which nobody wants, but we need to be prepared to do.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Gerald, just to follow up real quick on that, I mean, actually that was one of the driving forces of the tanker Sealift security program, which was to relatively quickly get stipends out so that we're strengthening that fuel supply line for, places that are far away like the Indo-Pacific. Isn't that correct?
Sure, that's correct. I can think of any number of scenarios, but what we want is the ability to rely on U.S. flag capability.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Spear is up next. Floor is yours, Jackie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question to you, General, let me just get to my. I thought I was farther down the line. Here I go. Okay. General, one of the challenges of the Defense Personal Property Program faces is remarkably low response rates to post-move surveys. The data is essential for holding moving companies accountable for their services to military families. What's being done to assess the reason for such a low response rate and take corrective action?
Ma'am, when we look at the survey information that comes in, our estimate is about 30% of the customers, so to speak, respond on surveys. And my guess is, we get both extremes, but we could do better in that population. We have taken initiative and have put a company under contract to improve our survey process, and that's underway at the moment, actually, to make sure it's more accurate, more thorough, easy, and the analytics on the back end are more meaningful to drive better business decisions. So that's one of many initiatives in the area of defense property, personal property reform. So I really appreciate your continued push on that and support on that. Thank you.
And General, I have one last question on that issue. The American roll-on-roll got the contract. It was then challenged. It was determined that it was still successful. It was re-granted. And then GAO did a evaluation and found that there were violations in 11 out of the 75 allegations that were made. So I guess there's a new contract that's being crafted now. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's correct. We anticipate an award sometime this fall in the September timeframe. Given that timeline, we'd want to implement that in the peak season of 22.
All right, thank you. Ms. Leslie, in addition to the Merchant Marine Academy and the State Maritime Academies, what is MARAD doing to recruit and train diverse and robust maritime workforce?
Thank you so much for that question. As mentioned, we're carrying out the tasks that were assigned to us in the 21 NDAA, developing a strategy and also looking at federal assistance. And we hope to very soon name the first centers of excellence in maritime education, another task given to the Maritime Administration in a prior NDAA. We are really excited about that program because it will obviously designate the schools, but enable them to enter partnerships with MARAD. And this could be the beginning of an effort to expand MARAD's reach, not only at the college level, but at the community college level, and looking even lower to the high school level to make people aware of the many well-paying career opportunities that are available in the maritime industry, and then to begin to recruit people into the industry.
That's really very important. And I think getting young people interested in high school is really key, because many of them are looking for career tracks, and this is one that can be very, very profitable. And congratulations on your new post as well.
Thank you very much.
Finally, General Lyons, Transcon cannot rely solely on encrypted defense networks for communication because you need to communicate with the commercial sector. But what are you doing to reduce the risk of intercept or other intrusions? What steps would you like for the industry to take to make their communications more secure?
Ma'am, we work very closely with industry on this issue. This remains a top priority for the command. So in the range of issues, we've enacted contractual language to improve cyber hygiene, as well as an analysis that follows their self-reporting. We've got a proof of principle on the table to do third-party verification. We've got a couple different initiatives with intelligence agencies to share information with select service providers. So there's a wide range of activities. Our assessments that come back tell us that the fundamentals, the basic things like multi-factor encryption and so forth, would go a long way to protect our industry partners. And we know that cyber vulnerabilities in our industry partners can very well equate to cyber vulnerabilities in our national defense infrastructure. So the good news, as I've mentioned previously, though, the C-suite executives, we're pushing on an open door. They get it. They want to move in the right direction, and I think there's a great deal of illumination ongoing.
Thank you. I'm sure with Colonial Pipeline, we all recognize now that the vulnerabilities for contractors, subcontractors is real, and we really need to address it. So I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Spear. Next up is Mr. Kahili.
Aloha mahalo, Chair, and aloha General Lyons and the rest of our panel speakers today. Sir, I'm a strong supporter of the Pacific Deterrence Initiative established in the FY21 NDA, primarily to enhance U.S. deterrence and defense posture in the Indo-Pacific region. Given what's happening, and I think my colleagues have touched on Indo-Pacific and China throughout the course of this briefing, especially in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait regions, which are being increasingly militarized and contested. I strongly support one of the PDI's programs, which is a new multinational movement coordination center in the Pacific. This center would coordinate the movement of friendly nations' military aircraft and vessels across the Indo-Pacific region. My understanding is it's supposed to be located at Indo-PACOM. Could you please, if you can, provide your views on how this new center would potentially impact TRANSCOM?
Well, thanks, sir. I'm a big advocate for what they're doing. To some degree, it mirrors what exists today in the Atari's program in UCOM, but I think they'll probably even take it to another level. So very important from my view to be able to collaborate with your allies and partners on all things, but particularly also on movement. So we see it as an advantage, as an enabler, and we're happy to plug in with them.
Okay. In reading the testimony on Air Mobility Command, it talks about the force structure of primarily our C-17, C-5 primary means of strategic airlift, and potential reductions in the C-130 fleet, some of which is required by the previous NDAs, and others, because of aging aircraft. And one of the statements in the testimony is that the C-130 force structure may be a source of discussion in this NDAA, whether that's TRANSCOM or AMC 130s or National Guard 130s. Can you elaborate on that?
I can, sure. When we do the mobility capabilities requirement study, we look at the entire package of force elements to include theater airlift, most of which is assigned to TRANSCOM and then allocated further to geographic combatant commands. When we look at the future joint warfighting concept and the associated supporting concepts, and when we look at some of the war plans that are evolving right now, we see a much higher demand on theater lift, not just airlift. It could also be lift in the littoral. So, we've got to think our way through how do we continue to present multiple options and create multiple dilemmas for an adversary. And you want to be able to come at them from any direction. So we're working very closely with the other combatant commands as well as the Air Force to assess risk against the program and the potential future plan reductions. Right now, I think we're in a good place, but we're watching closely to what that profile looks like and how much risk we're willing to accept.
Okay, thank you. And then last question relates to Indo-PACOM and what's happening in terms of China and Korea and TRANSCOM's role. I know we exercise it through Ulchi Freedom Guardian annually, or at least every few years, but that would be TRANSCOM's role in NEO operations off the pen, using gray tails to move American service members and their families 2 whitetail jets, probably in our bases in Japan and then back to the United States. Have we looked at the amount of TRANSCOM assets that we have, whether they're with ones assigned to PACAF or already out in the theater versus what we need to bring in, and how quickly we would be able to do that if an incident occurred on the Korean Peninsula?
We have, sure. We've looked at several scenarios, both with USFK and Indo-Pacom. And the work we do to size the fleet is typically against the highest, what we call the pacing demand. And then for other contingencies or branch plans, you mentioned a potential NEO, it could be anywhere on the globe. We do that analysis as well and look to see where that would fit. It would be a function of priorities, of the temporal nature, of how big the demand is. But the great thing about the mobility enterprise is we are extraordinarily flexible and resilient. So if the Secretary or the President decide they want to shift strategic priorities to a particular area, we can very, very rapidly shift to that priority.
Great. Well, thank you, sir. I look forward to working with you and your team out in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I yield my time.
Mr. Clay, thank you. Yes, it's been one of those days. I believe we have some of the members that missed the first round. I see a lot of blank screens. The very last vote is up, and since it includes about 15 bills en bloc, I would expect the members to return. Some of them to return, some of whom we missed in the first round because of the votes taking place and the technical difficulties. I've got a couple of questions of my own, and then we'll see if the members, Mr. Courtney, thank you. I think you have completed your questions. So, throughout this hearing, it appears as though the effort that has been made by MARAD, by TRANSCOM, Navy, and by the committee has not been successful. We've made a little bit of progress here and there, but we really have not been able to really put in place a comprehensive strategy and then carry it out. We've had bits and pieces. I want to thank the committee members, past and some of whom are still present, for various votes and various efforts that have been made. The tanker security program, it is there. It's a piece of the puzzle. The legislation this last year in the NDAA that calls for all military cargo to be on American ships and planes, that's another piece of the puzzle. There are other efforts that have been made. The National Maritime multipurpose, I guess this is for the various Maritimes academies. Those are now in process. I believe 2 or 3 or 4. Oh, I love that number. 4 are actually scheduled and I believe appropriated. Good. And there's another, Vallejo and the California coming up. All right, good. So these pieces of the puzzle are there. However, we still lack a comprehensive program. Mr. Krokowski, you talked about this. I want to go back and plow that field again with you. Mr. Whitman expressed his concerns about a comprehensive program. Here's what I am proposing, then, Mr. Krokowski, I want to go back and hit this again with you, is that we have a roundtable. Invite members of the 2 committees, Mr. Courtney's committee and my committee, to participate. Staff from and members of the Maritime Committee of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. That sometime within the next month we sit down, invite General Lyons or whomever you would like to send to that meeting, and that we develop for this year's NDAA a strategy that would provide over both dealing with the immediate, meaning now, this year, next year, appropriations, as well as the NDAA, and long-term. Mr. Tarkovsky, you laid out a long-term strategy. Actually, it's what's new is old. So we'll go back at that old strategy and see if we can develop a strategy that would be long-term over the next decade, 2 decades, be as immediate as possible, bringing on the 2 ships that are to come on board and be repurposed. I see some of my colleagues have returned. I don't know if Mr. Bergman, if you've had it. Oh my goodness, Mr. Bergman is here. I'm going to finish my comment. I'm going to lay it out there. Mr. Courtney and I, together with our ranking members, Mr. Lamborn and Mr. Whitman, we're going to have a roundtable. And we're going to see if we can lay out a strategy, get that strategy into this year's NDAA, perhaps in the appropriation process, and work on that. We have about 2 months to do that before the NDAA, which I now understand is in September timeframe. The appropriations will precede it, so I want to be sure that we address that along the way. With that, I think I've given our witnesses a sense of how we will call upon them to participate in that roundtable and see if we can lay out a strategy, pulling together the threads and the work that's been done into a comprehensive overarching strategy. Mr. Bergman, thank you for returning. Thank you for your willingness to be up and off and up and off, and now you're on, so go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to make just one comment, because what I heard probably 45 minutes ago, the subject was we'll do okay with people. We can talk about ships, we can talk about airplanes, we can talk about all sorts of things. You could literally, as we did in World War II, build airplanes and ships in an extremely brief period of time when you put the power of the industrial base and the government behind it. But you can't build an experienced mariner, let's put it this way, or aviator, whatever. I'm specifically here on the MARAD side, and as a member of the Board of Visitors for the Merchant Marine Academy, it's a too well-kept secret. But I would ask you to take for the record to have in fact, part of our roundtable I think would be spectacular, is a plan to show over a generation time period the development of educational and then post-educational opportunities, whether it's at sea, whether it's in the shipbuilding industry, but a plan to bring young men and women into this absolutely spectacular career. So I would just ask you to consider that. And if you already have something, of a background, send it to us, send it to me. I'd love to look at it. But it is all about the ability to populate the systems that we will be using when we need to use them. So I just thank you for that, Mr. Chairman, and the brevity, interest of brevity, I yield back.
Mr. Bergman, thank you. The comings and goings, the issue of mariners, the issue of skill sets has been discussed, and your interest in it would be to stay in touch and continue to work on that piece of it. I don't think we have a particularly good strategy to fulfill all the potential needs of the future. Oh my goodness, is that Mr. Carl I see? I do see him. Mr. Carl, you have been in and out at least 5 times by my count, and I've been gone, so perhaps it's 6 or 7, but here you are, it's your turn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly appreciate your patience. It's just one of those days, a zig and a zag. As we all know, the majority of the military Sealift command ships are very large vessels. These ships are unable to operate in shallow waters and extreme environments. I know the Navy is looking to purchase some used commercial vessels to rebuild its Sealift fleet. I'm worried that the Navy will have more ships that are unable to navigate in such areas as the South China Sea. General Lyons, my question is to you, sir. I know the Transcom is currently completing the mobile capability requirement study required by the fiscal year 2020 NDAA. Can the committee still count on receiving that results for the study next month?
Yes, sir. You sure can.
All right, thank you. And I look forward to thoroughly reviewing that study.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I believe we seem to have no one else on the screen, and only Mr. Lamborn and I are here in the hearing room. And Mr. Lamborn, if you have another question, it's your turn. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. I have one more issue, and that takes us back to the household goods movement. We talked about that at the earlier part of this hearing. There's a possibility, General Lyons, that the strategy that you have in place may not work through the years. Something may go awry in one way or another. And my question to you, and take this for the record, in the contract, is there an opportunity for the government to modify, to change, or to terminate the contract if there is a problem with the implementation of the program? If you can answer it now, fine. Otherwise, if you, for the record, come back to us for that. The reason I'm asking is that in the base housing program, these are very, very long-term contracts. If I recall, 30 years, and I think one is actually 40 years. And through the passage of time, problems have developed, and the government has found it very difficult, in fact, in some cases impossible, to renegotiate the contract. So heads up, if you can answer come back to us. If you want to take it up now, fine. Otherwise, come back to us later.
Well, Chairman, I'll follow up with you, but I mean, I would just say there is always an option for the government to terminate on the government's conditions. I think you make an important point, though, sir, on the housing analogy. This is part of precisely why we knew we needed to get our arms around the household good industry, because we lacked clear accountability. So we have contracts with quite literally dozens, probably 40, 50, 60 vendors. We know, we do this professionally. We know how to write contracts. We know how to hold vendors accountable. But to your point, there is always a means for the government to ensure accountability, and that's exactly why we moved in this direction. And I think it was reinforced by the Government Accounting Office and others who supported the strategy. But I admit to you that we must deliver for military families. That's the North Star.
Indeed, we must. The passage of time, things don't always work out as planned, and therefore the ability of the government to modify, terminate, or otherwise deal with whatever issue might arise. We've had a very, very bad experience in housing, and I'll let it go at that. I believe we have run the course here. I don't see any more members. So General Lyons, thank you so very much for your patience, for the work, for your service over the many, many years. And sometime in the next 30, 45 days, you or whomever you'd like to send, let's see if we can actually build a strategy and a program to address the multiple pieces of this very complex and very necessary program. Ms. Leslie, thank you. Thank you for your service as acting. Don't know what the future is going to hold for you, but we know that you've served this House well in the past, so thank you very much. I'm surely going to flub up your name again, Mr. Tokoski, but did I get it right? Practice makes perfect. With me, it takes a lot of practice. Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you on putting together an overarching program to deal with this complex Sealift issue. Thank you very much. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, John. Thank you.
Well, we got it.